Well, the book itself leads us through your life, part of which was spent your early years out in the Fraser Valley. I like this picture in the top right-hand corner here. What is that?
Oh, that's the old farmhouse at Warnock. Dad owned, in those days, didn't cost very much money to buy land up the Fraser River, and he had 2 quarter sections, which is a lot of land. But he spent 25 years of his life and all his inheritance money clearing and cultivating that land. He had 40 acres under cultivation. And this is the old farmhouse, and there's, you can see the similarity between this and the old house where my dad and I, and for generations, we were all born in Findon, Derbyshire. And
it has an English look to it,
yeah, it was built of brick, and this was built of
wood. But it had, what, a tennis court? 2 tennis courts.
Oh, yes, they had 2 tennis courts so that when they were mowing one or the grass was growing in one, they could use the other one, and also a croquet lawn. And while my mother and dad would be out milking several dozen milking cows, they had a dairy among everything else, they'd change clothes in the evening, put their flannels on, and then they'd go play tennis, just to keep in shape.
Well, it's amazing, isn't it? And croquet is so much, was so much of part of the lifestyle of people in the 19th century.
Yes. When do you ever see it nowadays?
No, it's, well, I think I did hear it. It's coming back.
Oh, well.
Well, boats have always been a part of your life, Jim, and here's one in the lower part over here.
Oh, that was
my
first boat. Yes, as you can see, it was
Jim Spilsbury, not at sea, but on land,
a horse trough,
in a horse trough.
And that's about as close as I ever wanted to get to a horse. I didn't like farming.
You didn't like horses?
No.
Well, so much of your early life was spent on Savary Island. You know, I was thinking perhaps a lot of people aren't aware as to where it is. Where is Savary Island?
Oh, Savary Island. Most people nowadays have a rough idea where Powell River is, and Powell River is roughly 70 miles up the 60 miles up the coast. Savary Island is another 10 miles further up, opposite Lund, and Savary Island is really geologically a sandbar 5 miles long, and in the last few hundred years has a few trees growing on it, but it's mostly sand, and the beaches are beautiful. Very popular as a summer resort.
And it, I was just looking here, we'll come across a lovely photograph of of the beach and the water there. The water is warm, I found, comparatively warm for the coast.
Yes, there are 2 reasons for that. One is it is in the northern part of the Strait of Georgia where the tides meet, the north and southbound tides, so you have normally very little current. It's when you get current in the sea that it boils all the cold water up from down below. Then the other thing is, of course, if you stay in shallow water, the sun has been shining on the sand, say, all day, and then the water comes in over it. That warms it, too. So Savary does have fairly warm water.
And the photograph here at the top is one you people moved to Savary, what was it?
1912, and then went back again in 1913, and we were there when the war broke out. And in the meantime, Dad had sold the farm, and the sale went sour on him, and he never got any money, and he finally lost all the land up at Warnock for taxes because
that's sad.
He didn't have the farm, he couldn't make any money, and the government wanted his taxes, so he lost it, everything. So he did whatever he could around Savary in the way of cutting wood and building the odd house, and we managed to survive.
And you
this
lived,
picture,
yes.
Yeah, after moving into Colonel Herchmer's. Colonel Herchmer, incidentally, was the originator of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. He's the one that started it all, and he retired up at Savary. And Dad got a job fixing his house up and painting it, and we lived in the house during that winter. And then when they came up in the spring, we had nowhere else to go. built this tent.
It's hard to believe that it's a tent, but it's amazing.
I spent 10 years of my life there from 1914 to 1924, but by that time the canvas was all gone. We had a shake roof on it, and we'd wall the sides up with driftwood, so by that time it was a shack, not a tent. But we've done that 3 different times.
Isn't that amazing? Well, were there many people at that time on Savary, like during the war years there?
Of the permanent residents, there would be possibly, on the average, about 8 families. There were enough to open a school. That's another reason we stayed at Savary, because they were going to have a school, which they did in 1914, and there were an average of 14 pupils in 8 different grades. And I was one of them, and I started in grade... we used to call them readers in those days, and I started in second reader, and I got my high school entrance in 4 years. But terrific. Never got to high school. That's another thing.
Well, just this
photograph. That's where plans go.
Well, we have another photograph here that caught my eye. This was
going down the cliff on the south side, it's still very much like that. It's a very steep cliff, and that would be a picture of people going out down
on picnics.
The trail on a picnic.
I thought it was marked with the women with their long skirts hobnobbling down those cliffs there. Well, you've got a marvelous collection of the whole coastal area. I couldn't believe that this photograph here was one taken at Campbell River.
Yes, and that would be taken in 1912 or 1913. Before we moved permanently to Savary, we went up and spent 2 weeks in the hotel, the old Malaspina Hotel at Lund, with the Tulins.
And we have a picture of we're coming to that photograph of the...
And then one day, one Sunday or something, we all went over to Campbell River in their boat, the old city of Lund. And that's all there was to see in those days was the hotel at Campbell River.
And you mean that was Campbell River, more or less?
Yeah, and I read in the... I was reading a magazine yesterday where the mayor of Campbell River, the lady says they have a population now of 20,000 and they expect to reach 50,000 at the end of this
Well, it's quite incredible, isn't it, that in one's lifetime there's been this terrific population boom. Well, you made reference to Lund, which is just north of Powell River, and one of the features there, of course, was the old hotel, and just what was this about?
Well, Lund got a start with Charlie Tulin, who came over from Sweden to log, and then he got smart and built a beer parlor, or they called it a bar then, and a hotel, and set up a store, and he sold firewood to the tugboats, because all the tugs in those days were steamboats, and they burned cordwood.
Must have burned it by the...
So he had a gang of men cutting cordwood, and the tugs came in there, so while they were in there, he'd sell them liquor and so on. And this picture was taken in about 1914. The boat on the left-hand side of the picture is the old Empress of Lund.
What a majestic name.
Oh, yes.
And
the one in the center, I've forgotten the name right now, but the one on the right-hand side of the picture was called the Cypress Queen, and it was a small steamboat. Most of the small boats in those days had steam engines in them, and this one, I do remember, had a leaky boiler, and they'd put a patch against the side of the boiler with some canvas and leather and stuff, and then they got a Gilchrist jack against the side of the boat and put a patch of wood against that, and they held the patch on the boiler with the Gilchrist jack.
Isn't that amazing?
That was not the low pressure boiler, of course.